Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all having a great evening. I want to start by saying thank you for all the support on the last few videos. It really means a lot to me that you guys enjoy these stories as much as I enjoy finding them. Tonight, I've gathered some of the most intense, long-form stories I could find. We're talking deep dives into situations that just kept escalating. Before we jump in, do me a favor, drop a comment and let me know what you're doing while listening to this. Are you grinding in Minecraft, finishing up some homework, or just trying to clear your head before sleep? I love reading about your routines. Anyway, get comfortable, dim the lights, and let's get into our first story. This one is a wild ride about a homeowners association, HOA, that tried to mess with the wrong person, and a legal battle that lasted years. So to give you some context, I'm a structural engineer. I've spent my career looking at blueprints, building codes, and legal requirements for construction. I'm also someone who values peace and quiet, which is why 5 years ago I bought a beautiful house on a 2-acre lot at the edge of a quiet, upscale neighborhood. When I bought the place, I knew there was an HOA. Now, I'm not a fan of HOAs, but this one seemed light. The dues were low and the rules mostly focused on keeping the common areas clean, or so I thought. For the first 2 years, everything was fine. I mowed my lawn, painted my shutters in neutral grey, and kept to myself. Then a new board was elected. The leader of this board was a woman I'll call Karen. Karen was retired, had way too much time on her hands, and possessed a burning desire to turn our neighborhood into a carbon copy of a Stepford Wives movie set. She wanted every blade of grass to be exactly 2.5 inches tall, and she wanted every house to follow a very specific, very beige aesthetic. The trouble started when I decided to build a high-end, professional-grade greenhouse in my backyard. Because of my background, I didn't just buy a kit from a hardware store, I designed it myself. It was going to be a beautiful structure, tempered glass, powder-coated steel frame, automated climate control, and a foundation that could withstand a hurricane. It was my passion project. Before I broke ground, I did my due diligence. I checked the HOA bylaws that I had signed when I moved in. The bylaws stated that any outbuilding or structure must be submitted for approval to the Architectural Review Committee (ARC). However, there was a crucial clause. If the ARC fails to respond to a written request within 30 days, the request is deemed automatically approved. I sent my plans via certified mail. I included 20 pages of engineering specs, site maps, and aesthetic renderings. I got the receipt back showing they had received it. I waited. Day 10, no response. Day 20, silence. Day 30, nothing. On day 31, I waited until 5:00 p.m. and when no email or letter arrived, I called my contractor. We started pouring the foundation that weekend. 2 weeks into the build, the steel frame was up. It looked magnificent. That's when I heard a screeching of tires in my driveway. It was Karen in her white SUV. She didn't even get out of the car. She just rolled down the window and started screaming. "What do you think you're doing? That monstrosity wasn't approved. Stop work immediately." I walked over as calm as could be and said, "Good morning, Karen. Actually, it was approved. I sent the plans 45 days ago, and per Section 4, Paragraph B of the bylaws, since I received no response in 30 days, I'm good to go." Her face turned a shade of purple I didn't know was humanly possible. "I don't care what the paper says," she yelled. "I didn't see it, and I'm the president. This structure is an eyesore, and it's going to tank the property values of everyone on this street. Take it down, or I'll make your life a living hell." I just smiled and told her to have a nice day. I thought that would be the end of it, or at least that she'd realize she messed up by not checking the mail. I was very, very wrong. This was only the beginning of a 3-year war that would eventually cost the HOA hundreds of thousands of dollars and led to a complete meltdown of our local government. Over the next few days, I started getting fines. Day 1, $100 for unauthorized construction. Day 2, $250 for operating heavy machinery on a weekend. Day 3, $500 for aesthetic noncompliance. They were tacking these on every single day. I ignored them and kept building. My lawyer, a guy who specializes in property law and absolutely hates HOAs, told me to keep a detailed log of every interaction. But Karen wasn't just using the HOA, she started getting personal. I'd wake up at 2 a.m. to someone shining a spotlight on my house. I found trash thrown over my fence. She even called the city's building inspector on me, claiming I was building a commercial laboratory in a residential zone. When the building inspector arrived, he looked at my plans, looked at the structure, and then looked at me. "This is better built than most of the houses in this zip code," he said. He signed off on it immediately, but Karen didn't stop. She convinced the board to place a lien on my house because of the unpaid fines, which had now ballooned to over $15,000. This was the moment I stopped being the nice neighbor and started being the professional engineer with a grudge. I knew that if I wanted to win, I couldn't just defend myself. I had to go on the offensive. And I knew exactly where to look: the HOA's own finances and their historical compliance with state laws. Once that lien hit my property title, my lawyer, let's call him Mike, just rubbed his hands together with a grin. "They just handed us the rope to hang them with," he said. "You see, in my state, filing a fraudulent lien on a property is a serious offense. It's not just a civil matter, it can cross into criminal territory if you can prove malicious intent. And boy, did we have proof. But before we went to court, I decided to do some engineering-style research. Under state law, every member of an HOA has the right to inspect the association's financial records, meeting minutes, and vendor contracts. I sent a formal request for inspection via certified mail, giving them the statutory 10 days to comply. 10 days passed. Silence. On the 11th day, I walked into the HOA's small management office. Karen was there, sitting behind a desk, looking like she was guarding the gates of a fortress. "I told you we're busy," she snapped before I even opened my mouth. "We don't have time to gather papers for your little revenge project. Those records are private." I placed a copy of the state statute on her desk and pointed to the section highlighted in neon yellow. "Actually, Karen, these records belong to the homeowners. Every second you deny me access, the HOA, and potentially you personally, accrues a daily fine from the state. Now are you going to open that filing cabinet, or should I call the sheriff to escort me while I exercise my legal rights?" She turned a very interesting shade of white. She knew I wasn't bluffing. She pointed to a stack of dusty boxes in the corner and told me I had 2 hours. I didn't need 2 hours. I had brought a high-speed portable scanner. I spent the next 90 minutes scanning every single bank statement, invoice, and contract from the last 5 years. That night, Mike and I sat in my home office with several pizzas and started digging. It didn't take long to find the glitch in the matrix. The HOA had a landscaping and beautification fund. Over the last 3 years, that fund had paid out nearly $80,000 to a company called Green Horizons LLC. I looked up Green Horizons in the Secretary of State's database. The registered agent and owner, Karen's brother-in-law. The beautification work consisted of planting some overpriced pansies in the common areas and consulting fees. In reality, it was a massive kickback scheme. Karen was funneling neighborhood dues directly into her family's pockets while simultaneously harassing anyone who didn't follow her arbitrary rules. It was a textbook case of embezzlement and breach of fiduciary duty. While I was gathering this evidence, life at home was becoming a tactical exercise. Karen had recruited 2 other neighbors, equally bored and bitter retirees, to form what they called the Compliance Patrol. They would park their golf carts at the edge of my driveway and just stare at my house for hours, taking notes on a clipboard. One day they tried to claim my grass was chemically imbalanced because it looked too green. Another time, they sent me a fine because my trash cans were visible for 15 minutes after the garbage truck left. I decided to have a little fun. Being an engineer, I have a decent grasp of electronics. I installed a series of motion-activated, high-intensity LED floodlights along my fence line, but I didn't just point them at the street. I calibrated them so that the moment a golf cart lingered for more than 30 seconds in front of my property, the lights would pulse in a specific sequence. It wasn't enough to cause a hazard, but it made it impossible for them to see anything or take photos. Then came the tree incident. On my property, right near the boundary, was a massive 100-year-old oak tree. It was beautiful and perfectly healthy. One morning, I woke up to the sound of a chainsaw. I ran outside to find a crew hired by Karen. They were about to start cutting it down. "Stop," I yelled. "What the hell are you doing?" The foreman showed me a work order. "HOA says this tree is a structural hazard to the sidewalk. This is my property and that tree is protected by the city's canopy ordinance," I told him. "If you touch that bark, I will sue your company into non-existence." The crew backed off, but Karen came running out of her house across the street, screaming that the board had voted the tree a nuisance. This was the turning point. I realized she didn't just want me to follow rules, she wanted to destroy anything I valued. That afternoon, I sent a mass email to the entire neighborhood. I had collected the email addresses of about 60% of the homeowners over the years. I didn't mention the lawsuit or the embezzlement yet. Instead, I invited everyone to a neighborhood transparency barbecue at my place that Saturday. I promised free brisket and very interesting financial news. Karen tried to shut it down. Saturday arrived, nearly 50 people showed up. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. As people were eating, I set up a projector against the side of my house. I showed them the photos of Karen's Compliance Patrol stalking my home. I showed them the daily fines for things like grass being too green. And then I dropped the bomb. I put the Green Horizons LLC documents on the screen. I showed the invoices signed by Karen and the checks deposited by her brother-in-law. The crowd went from quiet to absolutely livid. One guy, a veteran who lived 3 doors down, stood up. "She fined me $200 last month because my kid left a bicycle on the porch for 10 minutes. You're telling me she's stealing 80 grand. The fire was lit, but Karen wasn't done. She had been watching from her window, and about 10 minutes into my presentation, 2 police cruisers pulled up to my curb. Karen had called them, claiming I was distributing illegal substances and disturbing the peace with a riotous assembly. The officers walked up the driveway. The neighborhood was silent. I stepped forward, handed the lead officer a copy of my permit for the gathering. Yes, I had gotten a city permit just in case, and a plate of brisket. "Officer, we're just discussing the HOA budget," I said. The officer looked at the projector screen, which was still showing a $12,000 invoice for shrub maintenance that clearly never happened. He looked at the 50 angry but peaceful neighbors. Then he looked at Karen, who was standing on her porch, pointing at me and screaming for them to arrest the criminal. The officer turned back to me. "The brisket smells great. Keep the noise down after 10 p.m. and good luck with the audit." That was the night the neighborhood officially split into two camps. But little did I know, Karen was about to do something so incredibly illegal that it would move this whole conflict from a neighborhood squabble to a federal investigation. The week after the barbecue was the quietest it had been in months, but as an engineer, I know that silence often precedes a structural failure. I spent that week installing more cameras, not just the visible ones, but discrete, high-resolution 4K units with thermal imaging. I wanted to see everything that moved on my property line, even in total darkness. My lawyer Mike had already filed a countersuit against the HOA for harassment and slander of title due to the fraudulent lien. But the real nuclear move was the audit demand we sent to the state's Department of Real Estate. When an HOA is accused of financial crimes, the state doesn't play around. Karen, however, didn't seem to realize she was in a legal minefield. She decided that if she couldn't win in the courtroom of public opinion, she'd win by brute force. On Wednesday at 3:00 a.m., my phone buzzed with a silent alert. My Zone 4 camera, the one covering the side of my house where the main water line enters, had detected heat and movement. I pulled up the live feed on my tablet. It was Karen. She was wearing a dark tracksuit and holding a massive pipe wrench. She was trying to shut off my main water valve, and from the looks of it, she was attempting to sabotage the backflow preventer. If she broke that, not only would my water be cut off, but I'd have a massive, expensive repair job on my hands. I didn't call the police immediately. I watched. I wanted the footage to be undeniable. I watched her struggle with the wrench. She clearly didn't have the mechanical leverage, and eventually she gave up on the valve and moved toward my backyard. She had a bag with her. She reached inside and started throwing something over my fence into the area where my dogs usually run during the day. That was it. My cool engineer exterior evaporated. I didn't care about the water, but you do not mess with my dogs. I threw on my boots, grabbed a high-lumen tactical flashlight, and stepped out onto the porch. I didn't say a word. I just hit the panic button on my security system. The entire property erupted in strobe lights and a 120 decibel siren. Karen jumped so high she nearly took out her own knees with that pipe wrench. I marched down the stairs, shining the light directly into her eyes. "Karen," I said, my voice shaking with pure rage, "get off my property. Now. I'm conducting an emergency inspection." She stammered, squinting against the light. "I smelled a gas leak. I'm the president. I have the right to enter for safety." "There's no gas line on this side of the house, Karen. You're holding a pipe wrench and you just threw something into my backyard. Stay right there. The police are already on their way." She tried to run, but she tripped over my landscaping lights. By the time she scrambled up, 2 patrol cars were already pulling into the cul-de-sac. They didn't even have to ask what happened. They saw the wrench on the ground and Karen looking like a frantic cat caught in a spotlight. But here, where it gets federal. While the police were questioning her, I went into the backyard with a pair of gloves and a plastic bag. I found what she had thrown over the fence. It wasn't poison, thank God. It was a stack of mail. I looked through it. It was about 20 letters addressed to me and 3 other neighbors who had been vocal at the barbecue. These weren't just utility bills. One of them was a certified letter from the state attorney general's office, addressed to me. It had been opened. Karen hadn't just trespassed. She had been stealing mail from our cluster boxes for weeks, presumably looking for evidence of our conspiracy against her, or trying to intercept the very legal documents that were part of the audit. The police officer's face changed the moment I showed him the opened mail. "Sir," he said, "I can handle the trespassing and the attempted vandalism, but tampering with mail, that falls under the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. That's a federal crime." Karen started screaming that she was protecting the community and that I had stolen those letters from her. The audacity was staggering. The officers handcuffed her right there in my driveway. As they were putting her in the back of the cruiser, she looked at me and yelled, "You'll never finish that greenhouse." "I've already contacted the EPA. You're finished." The EPA. I had no idea what she was talking about, but I found out the next morning. Apparently, Karen had sent an anonymous tip to the Environmental Protection Agency, claiming that I was using my unauthorized industrial structure, the greenhouse, to refine illegal chemicals that were leaking into the local groundwater. Now, normally, the EPA doesn't just show up because of a random tip. But Karen had forged soil sample reports using the HOA's letterhead, claiming that preliminary testing showed high levels of toxic runoff. When the EPA agents showed up at 9:00 a.m., I was exhausted. I hadn't slept. I met them at the gate. They were professional but serious. "We have a report of a level 2 chemical hazard," the lead agent said. "I didn't fight them. I didn't get angry. I did what an engineer does. I provided documentation." I handed them a 50-page binder containing the MSDS, Material Safety Data Sheets, for every single fertilizer and soil component I used. I showed them my automated drainage system. which recycled 100% of the water used in the greenhouse. I even showed them the hazardous soil report Karen had sent them. The agent looked at the report, then at my greenhouse, which was essentially a high-tech garden. "Wait," he said, pointing to a signature on the report. "This lab tech signature. This is a local dry cleaner's name. I know this guy." Karen had been so lazy with her forgery that she used a signature from a dry cleaning receipt. The agents were beyond annoyed. They had driven 3 hours for a chemical emergency, only to find a very well-organized vegetable garden. "Mr. Engineer," the lead agent said, closing his briefcase, "we're going to write a report stating this tip was not only unfounded but maliciously fabricated, and we're going to refer this to the state attorney's office for filing a false report with a government agency." At this point, Karen was in jail for the night on the trespassing and mail theft charges. Her brother-in-law, the Green Horizons guy, had already gone into hiding. The HOA board was in a state of total collapse, but I wasn't done. I didn't just want Karen gone. I wanted to make sure no one could ever use an HOA as a personal weapon in this neighborhood again. I called an involuntary special meeting of the homeowners. Since I now had evidence of felony crimes and embezzlement, I didn't need the board's permission to call the meeting. I just needed 20% of the residents' signatures. I got 90% of them in 4 hours. The meeting was set for Friday night. Karen had just been released on bail. She actually had the nerve to show up at the community center, wearing a Save Our Neighborhood t-shirt, acting like she was the victim of a massive frame-up. She walked up to the podium before I could even start. "This meeting is illegal," she shrieked. "I am still your president. This man is a criminal who is trying to turn our suburb into a chemical wasteland." I didn't even argue, I just turned on the projector. This time I didn't show bank statements. I showed the thermal video of her at 3:00 a.m. with the pipe wrench, followed by the bodycam footage from the police officer finding the stolen mail in her bag. The room didn't just get quiet, it turned cold. Karen stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Karen," I said, standing up, "the board is being dissolved tonight, and we have some things to discuss regarding the $80,000 you spent on pansies." The silence in the community center after that video finished was absolute. You could literally hear the hum of the projector's cooling fan. Then the veteran from 3 doors down, the guy who'd been fined for his kid's bike, stood up. He didn't yell. He just looked at Karen and said, "Pack your things, Karen, we're done here." Karen tried one last, desperate power play. She grabbed the microphone, her knuckles white. "You can't remove me. The bylaws require a 60-day notice period for a board vacancy vote. Anything you do tonight is legally void." My lawyer Mike stepped up to the front. He didn't even need a microphone. His courtroom voice filled the room. "Actually, Karen, Section 9, Paragraph C of the state's Uniform Common Interest Ownership Act, which supersedes your little neighborhood pamphlet, states that in the event of documented criminal activity or gross breach of fiduciary duty, a board can be dissolved by a simple majority of the present quorum. And looking around this room, we have nearly 85% of the homeowners here. We held the vote right then and there. It wasn't even close. 142 votes to remove the board, 3 votes against, presumably Karen and her 2 compliance patrol cronies. But Karen wasn't going to go quietly into the night. 2 days later, I received a letter from a high-priced law firm in the city. Karen was suing me and the new interim board for $500,000. Her claim: intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation, and get this, an illegal coup. She was also demanding that the HOA pay for her legal defense. She cited the indemnification clause in the bylaws, which basically says the association has to protect board members from personal liability for their actions while in office. Mike just laughed when he saw the filing. "She's trying to drain the HOA's bank accounts to fight the very people who own that money," he said. "But there's a catch. Indemnification only applies if the board member acted in good faith." Stealing mail and funneling $80,000 to your brother-in-law is the literal definition of bad faith. While the lawyers were arguing over the indemnification, I went back to my engineering roots. I realized that if Karen was this sloppy with mail and bank statements, there had to be more. I started looking at the HOA's reserve study, the document that predicts when the roads need to be repaved or the pool house roof needs to be replaced. The reserve study said we had $150,000 in a capital improvements account. I checked the bank records we'd scanned earlier. The account existed, but there was only $12,000 left. Where had the other $138,000 gone? It didn't go to Green Horizons LLC. It went to a series of payments for administrative consulting to a company called Apex Solutions. I did a deep dive into Apex Solutions. It was a shell company registered in Delaware, but I'm an engineer, I'm good at finding patterns. The Apex office address was a PO box in a small town 3 hours away. I decided to take a Saturday drive. When I got to that PO box, I waited. After about 2 hours, a familiar white SUV pulled into the parking lot. It wasn't Karen. It was Dave, the Green Horizons brother-in-law. He walked into the post office, opened the Apex Solutions box, and pulled out a stack of envelopes. I didn't confront him. I just sat in my car and filmed the whole thing. Then I followed him. He didn't go back to the neighborhood. He went to a brand new luxury lakefront property about 30 minutes away. I ran the address through the county tax assessor's website. The owner, a trust in Karen's name. Karen hadn't just been stealing a few thousand here and there. She'd been embezzling the neighborhood's entire long-term savings to buy herself a secret retirement house on the lake. When I brought this evidence to the new board, the air left the room. We weren't just talking about a neighborhood feud anymore. This was a massive criminal enterprise. We decided it was time to involve the district attorney's white-collar crime unit. But before the DA could move, Karen's compliance patrol started to crumble. One of the women, Mrs. Gable, who had been Karen's right-hand woman, showed up at my front door on a Tuesday evening. She was crying. "I didn't know about the money," she sobbed. "I just wanted the neighborhood to look nice. I thought we were doing the right thing." "Why are you telling me this now, Mrs. Gable?" I asked. "Because Karen asked me to do something today, something horrible." She handed me a small, black device. It was a high-frequency acoustic jammer. "She wanted me to hide this near your greenhouse. She said it would interfere with the sensors and cause the glass panels to vibrate until they shattered. She said it would look like a structural failure and prove you were a bad engineer." I looked at the device. It was professional grade. If she had used it, it could have caused tens of thousands of dollars in damage, and if anyone had been inside, the falling glass could have been fatal. "Mrs. Gable," I said, "you need to go to the police station. Right now, if you tell them what she asked you to do, you might stay out of jail. If you don't, you're an accomplice to attempted felony vandalism." She went. That night, Karen was arrested again. This time it wasn't just trespassing. It was solicitation to commit a felony. As Karen was being led away in handcuffs for the second time in 2 weeks, she looked at me. I was standing on my porch, just watching, and she didn't scream this time. She just stared at me with this hollow, terrifying look of pure hatred. The next morning, the Green Horizons' brother-in-law, Dave, vanished. He'd seen the news of Karen's arrest and realized he was next. He cleaned out his bank accounts and took off, but he was sloppy. He left his laptop in the lake house, and when the police searched the property, they found a ledger, an actual physical book where Karen had been tracking every cent she stole from us. She had been planning this for 5 years. Every fine she issued, every beautification project she started, was calculated to drain our bank accounts into hers. She even had a list of troublemakers, homeowners she wanted to harass until they moved, so she could buy their houses at a discount and flip them. My name was at the top of that list, circled in red ink. But even with the ledger, Karen's high-priced lawyers were still fighting. They managed to get her out on bail again. And she retreated into her house, boarded up the windows, and refused to come out. The neighborhood felt like a war zone. We had interim board members patrolling the streets at night to make sure she didn't try any more sabotage. My greenhouse was finished now, a beautiful, glowing sanctuary of glass and steel, but I couldn't even enjoy it. I felt like I was waiting for the final act of a tragedy. And that final act started when the Apex Solutions Bank froze Karen's accounts. She was out of money, out of friends, and her lawyers finally quit when her checks started bouncing. That's when Karen decided that if she couldn't have the neighborhood, nobody could. The week after Karen's bank accounts were frozen felt like living in a pressure cooker. The neighborhood was quiet, but it was an unnatural, heavy silence. Most of the board members who had supported her had resigned in disgrace, and the new board, which I was now technically advising, was busy trying to untangle the financial mess she'd left behind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't done. I'm an engineer, I deal with systems. And when a system is under extreme stress, it doesn't just stop, it fails catastrophically. I decided to upgrade my security one last time. I didn't just want cameras anymore, I wanted sensors. I installed moisture sensors near the neighborhood's main water shutoff valves and vibration sensors on the electrical transformers near the entrance. If anyone touched the critical infrastructure of our community, my phone would scream. It happened on a Thursday night around 2:15 a.m. My phone didn't just buzz, it let out a piercing alarm I'd programmed for critical infrastructure failure. I bolted out of bed and looked at my monitors. It wasn't my house this time. It was the neighborhood's retention pond and the main drainage culvert. For context, our neighborhood sits on a slight slope. To prevent flooding during heavy rains, we have a massive retention pond at the bottom, managed by a complex system of gates and pipes. If those gates are opened manually during a dry spell, it doesn't do much. But if you block the main drain and simultaneously open the fire hydrants uphill, you get a man-made flood that will wash away the foundations of 10 houses in an hour. I looked at the thermal feed from the pond area. There was a figure in a dark poncho, working frantically at the main control valve with a long metal rod. It was Karen. She had somehow gotten a key to the utility locks, probably one she'd lost years ago while she was president. I didn't call the police first this time. I called the city's emergency utility line and then the fire department. Then I grabbed my coat and ran toward the pond. When I got there, the sound was terrifying. She had already opened 2 of the high-pressure relief valves, and water was geysering into the streets. But that wasn't the worst part. She was pouring something, dozens of gallon jugs, directly into the rising water. I shined my light on her. "Karen, stop, what the hell are you doing?" She didn't even flinch. She looked at me and her eyes were completely glazed over. She looked like someone who had moved past anger into a state of total detachment from reality. If they want to take my house for the debt, let them take a swamp, she whispered, loud enough to be heard over the rushing water. I built this community. I made it beautiful. If I'm not the one who gets to watch it grow, then nobody gets it. She was pouring industrial-grade blue dye and some kind of thick, oily substance into the water. I later found out it was a mix of old motor oil and concentrated herbicide. She was trying to poison the entire local ecosystem and ruin the lawns and foundations of every house on the lower circle. I didn't tackle her. You don't tackle someone who has clearly snapped. I stayed back and tried to talk her down while the sirens grew louder in the distance. Karen, the EPA is already looking at you for the false reports, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. If you do this, you're looking at decades in federal prison for environmental terrorism. It's not worth it. It's already done, she laughed. It was a high, thin sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. The police and the fire department arrived minutes later. It took 4 officers to get her away from the valves. She fought them with a strength I didn't think a woman her age possessed, screaming about usurpers and traitors. While they were wrestling her into the cruiser, the fire department worked to shut off the valves. Because I had caught it early, the physical damage was limited. The water had flooded 3 crawl spaces and ruined a few expensive landscaping projects, but the foundations were safe. However, the environmental damage was another story. The oil and herbicide had reached the protected wetlands behind our neighborhood. The next morning, the civil part of this war ended, and the state and federal part began. Because the retention pond connected to a federally protected waterway, the Clean Water Act kicked in. Karen wasn't just facing HOA fines or local trespassing charges anymore. She was being hit with multiple counts of felony environmental sabotage. The EPA didn't just send a letter this time. They sent a team in hazmat suits. They spent 3 days testing the soil and water. The cost of the cleanup was estimated at over $250,000. And since Karen had done it with malicious intent after being removed from her position, her insurance wouldn't cover a dime. The neighborhood was in shock. For years, people had complained about her being strict or annoying, but nobody realized they were living next to a ticking time bomb. While Karen sat in a high-security psychiatric ward awaiting trial, the new board made a move that was the ultimate engineer's revenge. We filed a judicial foreclosure on her house. Usually this takes years, but because she owed the HOA over $200,000 in embezzled funds, damages from the flood, and unpaid fines, we were able to fast-track it through a special master in the court. We didn't just want her gone, we wanted her assets to pay back the neighbors she had stolen from. 3 months later, I stood on my front porch and watched as a moving crew, hired by the sheriff's office, started carrying Karen's furniture out of her house. All her expensive beige decor, her designer rugs, her collection of HOA trophies, it was all piled onto a truck to be sold at auction. But there was one final gift Karen had left for us. When the cleanup crew entered her basement to check for water damage from her own flood attempt, they found a hidden room behind a false wall. It wasn't filled with money or more stolen mail. It was a war room. The walls were covered in photos of every single person in the neighborhood. There were notes about our schedules, our pets' names, where our kids went to school, and even weaknesses she had observed. Beside my photo, she had written, "Technician, needs a system failure, break the glass." She hadn't just been an embezzler. She had been a stalker on a professional scale. The discovery of that room changed the charges from environmental sabotage to aggravated stalking and harassment with intent to harm. The district attorney told us that with the evidence in that room, she would likely never set foot in our county again. But as the neighborhood started to heal, and we finally got the Green Horizons brother-in-law arrested in another state, I realized something. This whole ordeal had started because I wanted to build a greenhouse. And now, with the HOA finally being run by normal, sane people, we decided to rewrite the bylaws from scratch. We made them engineer-proof. We added transparency clauses that required monthly independent audits. We made it so that no single person could ever hold more than 1 year of power without a mandatory neighborhood-wide vote. But I wasn't done with Karen's house. The HOA bought the property at the foreclosure auction for a fraction of its value, using the money we recovered from the Green Horizons bank accounts. And we did something that I think finally broke Karen's spirit when she heard about it from her cell. We didn't sell the house to another Karen. We leveled it. We turned her lot into a community park. A place with wildflowers, benches, and, at my suggestion, a massive, beautiful community greenhouse where anyone could grow whatever they wanted. But wait, there's a final twist to this story that I didn't see coming. It involves the Green Horizons brother-in-law and a secret bank account in the Cayman Islands that he tried to use to buy his way out of trouble. So Karen's house was gone, replaced by a community park. She was locked away, awaiting a trial that would likely keep her behind bars for the next decade. But there was still the matter of the missing money, the $80. Zero we found in the Green Horizons kickback scheme was just the tip of the iceberg. My forensic accounting, which by the way is surprisingly similar to structural stress analysis, showed that over $400,000 had vanished from our HOA accounts over the last 5 years. That's a lot of shrub maintenance. We knew Dave, the brother-in-law, had fled to Belize or somewhere in Central America. but he was arrogant. He thought that once he crossed the border, he was untouchable. One evening, while I was sitting in my newly finished greenhouse, sipping a coffee and watching the automated misting system work its magic, I got a notification on my laptop. I had set up a Google alert for any mention of Apex Solutions, the shell company Karen used. An article popped up from a small financial news site in the Caribbean. A man matching Dave's description had been detained for trying to open a high-volume merchant account using a set of forged HOA documents from our neighborhood. The idiot was trying to use our HOA's tax ID number to launder money through a casino in the Cayman Islands. I immediately called Mike, my lawyer. Mike, he's in the Caymans, and he's using our credentials. Mike didn't skip a beat. That's wire fraud and identity theft on an international level. That's no longer a local police matter. That's FBI territory. Within 48 hours, we were in a conference call with a special agent from the FBI's white-collar crime division. It turns out Dave hadn't just been stealing from our neighborhood. He had been running this HOA shadow scam in 4 different states. He would find neighborhoods with elderly or distracted board members, get Karen or someone like her elected as president, and then systematically drain the reserves through Apex Solutions and Green Horizons. Our little neighborhood was just one of his clients. The FBI tracked the money trail from our local bank to a series of intermediary accounts in Florida, then to a crypto exchange, and finally to a private bank in Georgetown, Cayman Islands. But here where being an engineer helped again. The FBI was struggling to get the Cayman Bank to cooperate because of their strict privacy laws. However, I noticed something in the wire transfer metadata I'd scanned months ago. Dave had used a very specific, outdated VPN service to mask his logins to the HOA's bank portal. That VPN company was based in the US and happened to have a backdoor for law enforcement if they could prove the service was used to facilitate a felony. I spent 12 hours straight building a logical map of every time Dave had accessed our accounts, cross-referencing it with the IP addresses from the VPN. I presented a 30-page report to the FBI that essentially acted as a digital fingerprint. "You didn't just give us a lead," the FBI agent told me. "You gave us the entire evidence locker." With that data, they got a federal subpoena. The Cayman Bank, fearing they would lose their US operating license for harboring a multi-state fraudster, froze every account associated with Dave and Apex Solutions. The total amount they recovered, $1.2 million. Only $400,000 of that belonged to our neighborhood, but the rest was returned to 3 other HOAs that didn't even know they were being robbed. While the FBI was rounding up Dave, they caught him at a luxury resort, literally holding a drink in a coconut. Things back home were getting interesting. The new board was now flush with cash. We had our $400,000 back, plus interest, plus the proceeds from the auction of Karen's assets. We were suddenly one of the wealthiest small HOAs in the state. But instead of just lowering the dues, we decided to do something Karen would have hated. We invested in hard resilience. We bought our own heavy-duty water pumps, our own backup generators for the streetlights, and we hired a private security firm that actually knew how to do patrols without being creepy golf cart stalkers. But the best part, we installed a transparency portal. I designed it myself. It was a website where every single homeowner could log in and see a live, real-time feed of the HOA's bank balance. Every time a check was written, a PDF of the invoice was automatically uploaded for everyone to see. If the board spent even $10 on a box of donuts for a meeting, there was a receipt for it. We called it the Karen-proof system. However, just when we thought life was getting back to normal, I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Karen's sister. "You think you've won," she hissed. She sounded just like Karen, but with a younger, sharper edge to her voice. "But you have no idea what you've started. My sister might be an award, but she has friends, people who don't like it when a system gets torn down. You've made some very powerful people very angry by involving the FBI." I just leaned back in my chair and looked at my greenhouse. "Is that a threat?" I asked. "It's a warning," she said. "Enjoy your little park while you can." She hung up. I didn't get scared. I just sighed and opened my laptop. If there's one thing I've learned about these Karen types, it's that they always think they're part of some grand, secret society, when in reality they're just small-time bullies who can't handle a little sunshine on their dirty secrets. But I decided to do one more background check, just in case. And that's when I found out that Karen's sister wasn't just a bitter relative. She was a high-ranking official in the county's zoning and planning department. The war wasn't over. It was just moving up to the county level. The phone call from Karen's sister wasn't just a bluff. In the world of local government, zoning and planning is where the real power hides. You can win a court case, you can even put someone in jail, but if the person in charge of your property's legal status decides to make you a target, they can bury you in paperwork until you go bankrupt. Her name was Brenda. And unlike Karen, who was impulsive and loud, Brenda was a bureaucrat. She knew how to use the slow grind of the system to destroy people. 2 days after that phone call, a black sedan with county plates pulled up to my curb. 2 men in high-visibility vests got out. They didn't knock on my door. They walked straight to my backyard fence and started taking photos of my greenhouse with specialized industrial cameras. I walked out, my phone already recording. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" One of them, a guy with a clip-on tie and a permanent scowl, handed me a notice of immediate cease and desist. "Your structure has been flagged for a secondary zoning audit," he said. "Specifically, County Ordinance 402B regarding accessory structures exceeding 15 feet in height. We have reason to believe your foundation encroaches on a protected utility easement." "I have the original permit signed by the city inspector," I said, keeping my voice level. "The easement is 3 feet beyond my property line. I checked it 10 times before we poured the concrete. The county has updated its GIS mapping," the man replied, not even looking at me. "According to the new maps, your greenhouse is sitting directly on top of a high-pressure gas main. It's a public safety hazard. You have 72 hours to provide a structural mitigation plan, or the county will issue a demolition order." A demolition order. For a structure that cost me $60,000 and hundreds of hours of labor. I went inside and pulled up the county's public GIS portal. Sure enough, the map had changed, but it hadn't just changed for me. The entire utility line on the digital map had a strange, jagged dogleg in it that moved it exactly 30 feet to the left, right under my backyard. I'm a structural engineer. I know how GIS systems work. These maps don't just drift by 30 feet overnight unless someone manually edits the coordinate layers. I called Mike. "They're moving the pipes on paper, Mike. They're trying to use a safety hazard to bypass the HOA laws and tear down my greenhouse." "This is Brenda," Mike said. "She's high enough in the department to authorize map corrections. If she marks that line as a gas main, the county has the right to enter your property with a bulldozer to protect the public." We need to move fast, but I didn't just want to stop the bulldozer. I wanted to see how deep this rabbit hole went. If Brenda was willing to fake a gas line to get revenge for her sister, what else had she done? I used the HOA's new transparency fund to hire a private investigator who specialized in municipal corruption. While he started digging into Brenda's office, I did some engineering of my own. I rented a ground-penetrating radar, GPR, unit. It's a device you roll over the ground that sees what's underneath using radio waves. On a Saturday morning, with 3 neighbors acting as witnesses and filming the whole thing, I rolled that GPR over my entire backyard. The results were exactly what I expected. There was no gas main, there wasn't even a PVC pipe. The ground under my greenhouse was solid, undisturbed earth. I took the GPR data, the original 1970s paper surveys I found in the city archives, and the digital new map, and I put them into a side-by-side comparison. It was a mathematical certainty that the map had been tampered with, but Brenda was one step ahead. On Monday morning, before I could even file my appeal, a red tag was slapped on my front door. My house was declared unsafe for habitation due to the imminent risk of a gas explosion. The county sheriff's deputies arrived to escort me off the premises. "You can't be serious," I told the deputy. "I have radar proof there's no pipe there." "I just follow the tags, sir," the deputy said. He looked embarrassed, but he had a job to do. "You have 1 hour to gather essentials. Gas company is scheduled to trench the backyard tomorrow morning. They weren't just going to tear down the greenhouse. They were going to dig a 6-foot deep trench through my property to find a pipe that didn't exist, effectively destroying my landscaping and my peace of mind. I moved into a hotel, but I wasn't defeated. That night, the private investigator called me. "You're not going to believe this," he said. I started looking into Brenda's map corrections over the last 5 years. It turns out she's moved utility lines on paper for dozens of properties. And guess who bought those properties at a discount after they were declared unsafe or undevelopable? "Let me guess," I said. "A company associated with Dave or Karen." "Close. A company called Stonebridge Equity. The owner is Brenda's husband. They've been using the zoning department to tank property values, force people out, and then buy the land for pennies on the dollar. Your greenhouse wasn't just revenge, you just happened to be the first person who actually fought back and looked at the maps. This was it, the grand unified theory of why Karen was so obsessed with compliance. She wasn't just a crazy HOA lady, she was the scout for a multi-million-dollar land-grabbing scheme run by her sister. I didn't go to the county. I didn't go back to Brenda. I went to the State Bureau of Investigation and the local TV News I-team. The next morning, as the county's heavy machinery pulled up to my house to begin the emergency trenching, they were met not by me, but by 3 news vans, 2 state investigators, and 40 of my neighbors holding signs that said zoning fraud. Brenda herself had showed up, presumably to gloat and oversee the destruction. She was standing there in a hard hat, looking triumphant, until the news reporter walked up to her and asked, "Mrs. Brenda, can you explain why your husband's company bought 3 properties last year that you personally flagged for gas pipe encroachments that turned out to be non-existent?" Her face didn't just turn white, it turned grey. She tried to turn around and get back in her car, but a state investigator stepped in her way. "We have a warrant for your office servers, Brenda," he said. "They didn't dig the trench. Instead, they spent the day taking the red tag off my door and apologizing. But the real fireworks were just starting. With Brenda's office under investigation, the entire Karen era of our HOA started to make sense. It was a feeder system for a criminal enterprise, but there was one last thing. Brenda, realizing her life was over, decided to try to take me down one last time. She claimed that I had hacked the county servers to frame her, and for a few days the authorities actually had to take it seriously because of my technical background as an engineer. I had to prove my innocence in the most public way possible, by testifying in front of the county board of supervisors while Brenda sat in the back of the room, flanked by lawyers. So there I was, standing in the county board of supervisors' chamber. The room was packed with neighbors, local journalists, and half the planning department. Brenda sat at the defense table looking smug. Her lawyers were arguing that because I was a highly skilled engineer with advanced technical knowledge, I was the only one capable of altering the GIS maps to frame her. It was a classic gaslighting tactic. They were trying to turn my greatest strength into my biggest liability. The chairman of the board looked at me. "Mr. Engineer, the allegations are serious. If the county's digital infrastructure was breached, it's a felony. How do you respond?" I didn't give a speech. I just pulled out a small USB drive. "Chairman, I don't need to argue. I have the server logs. When the State Bureau of Investigation, SBI, raided Brenda's office, they didn't just take her computer, they took the backup tapes. And those tapes show exactly who logged in to move the utility lines on the map." I projected the logs onto the overhead screen. You'll see that the edits to move the gas main onto my property were made at 10:14 p.m. on a Tuesday. I checked the building's security badge logs. At that exact time, Brenda's badge was used to enter the server room. Furthermore, I added, pausing for effect, at 10:15 p.m. Brenda's personal phone connected to the office Wi-Fi. I'm an engineer, I track data, and the data doesn't lie. The room erupted. Brenda's lawyer tried to object, but it was over. The SBI investigator stood up and confirmed that they had found the source code for the map edits on Brenda's home laptop, along with a list of 20 other properties she was planning to target next. Brenda didn't even wait for the hearing to end. She stood up, knocked over her chair, and tried to bolt for the side exit. 2 deputies tackled her before she reached the door. That was the final nail in the coffin for the Karen and Brenda empire. The aftermath was a legal landslide, because they had used Stonebridge Equity, the husband's company, to buy land based on Brenda's fraudulent maps. The state hit them with RICO charges, Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. That's the kind of stuff they usually use for the mob. Karen, who was already in the psych ward, was transferred to a state prison once she was declared fit for trial. Between the environmental sabotage, the mail theft, the embezzlement, and the racketeering, she was sentenced to 15 years. Brenda, as a public official who violated the public trust, got 20 years. Even the husband didn't escape. He got 8 years for money laundering. The county had to issue a formal apology to me. They paid for the full restoration of my backyard and gave me a lifetime zoning variance for my greenhouse, meaning no matter how much the laws change in the future, my structure is legally protected forever. The best part, the $1.2 million the FBI recovered from Dave in the Cayman Islands was finally distributed. Our HOA received its full $400,000 back. We used that money to pay off the mortgages of the 3 families Karen had bullied into nearly losing their homes. Today, my neighborhood is a different place. There's no compliance patrol. There are no golf carts lurking in the shadows. We still have an HOA, but the board members are required to take a conflict of interest course every year, and any fine over $50 has to be approved by a neighborhood-wide vote. My greenhouse is thriving. I grow rare orchids, giant tomatoes, and more peppers than I know what to do with. Every Sunday, the neighbors come over to the community park, the one built where Karen's house used to be, and we have a huge swap meet. We call it the Anti-Karen Market. Looking back, I realized that Karen wasn't just a bad neighbor. She was a symptom of a system that allows small people to have too much power. But as an engineer, I also know that no matter how strong a structure looks, if it's built on a foundation of lies, all it takes is one person looking at the blueprints to make the whole thing come crashing down. And that is where our first story ends. A multi-year war that started with a single bag of concrete and ended with a federal investigation. Hugh, take a second to process that one. It's wild how far some people will go just to steal from their own neighbors. If you're still with me, maybe take a quick stretch, refill your water, or check on your own Minecraft build. We've got a long night ahead of us, and I've got 2 more stories that are just as intense. Our next story is a bit different. We're moving away from the suburbs and into the high-stakes world of corporate tech. This one was sent in by a software developer who was tired of being the office workhorse, while his boss took all the credit. It's a story of malicious compliance that ended up crashing a multi-million-dollar product launch and getting the entire C-suite fired. If you've ever had a boss who told you to just do what you're told and stop asking questions, this one is for you. Here is the billion-dollar bug. I've spent 10 years as a senior backend developer. If you don't know what that is, basically I'm the guy who makes sure that when you click a button on an app, the data goes where it's supposed to go without the whole system exploding. It's a thankless job, but I'm good at it. 3 years ago, I was working for a fintech startup that was about to go public. We were the darling of the tech world. We had just secured $500 million in Series C funding, and the pressure was on to launch our global payments API. My boss was a guy I'll call Chad. Chad was the classic tech bro. He wore $400 hoodies, talked in buzzwords like synergy and disruptive architecture, but couldn't write a single line of functional code to save his life. He was a master of failing upwards. The problem started 6 months before the launch. I noticed a massive flaw in our core transaction logic. In very specific edge cases, like when someone was trying to transfer money between 3 different currencies simultaneously during a leap second, the system would double count the funds. It wasn't a frequent bug, but if a high-frequency trading bot figured it out, they could drain our entire liquidity pool in minutes. I brought this to Chad in a private meeting. I had a 10-page report showing exactly where the logic was failing. Chad didn't even look at the report. He just checked his Rolex and sighed. Look up, we're in growth mode now. We don't have time for edge cases. The board wants the API live by Q3. If we delay for a theoretical bug, our stock valuation drops by 20%. Just patch it with some middleware and let's move on. Chad, you can't patch a fundamental logic error, I told him. We need to rewrite the core ledger. It'll take 3 weeks, but it'll be safe. Chad stood up, his face getting red. I'm the VP of engineering, not you. I'm telling you to ignore it. In fact, I'm giving you a direct order. Do not touch the core ledger. I want all your focus on the user interface and the gamification features. Am I clear? I looked at him. I realized then that Chad didn't care if the company succeeded in the long run. He just wanted the launch to look good so he could cash out his stock options and leave before the theoretical bomb went off. Crystal clear, Chad, I said. That was the moment I decided to stop being the protective engineer and start being the maliciously compliant employee. So I took Chad's direct order and I didn't just follow it, I weaponized it. I went back to my desk, opened my email, and drafted a very specific summary of our meeting. Hi Chad, per our conversation just now, I am officially suspending all work on the ledger synchronization logic and the currency edge case bug. As per your instructions, I will be shifting my entire focus, and the focus of the backend team, to the gamification suite and the transaction celebrations UI. I understand that the core ledger is considered production ready as is. Please let me know if I misunderstood anything. Chad, being the genius he was, replied within 2 minutes. Exactly, let's win that Q3 launch, focus on the wow factor. I printed that email. I saved it to a private cloud drive. I even BCC'd my personal lawyer friend on it. In the corporate world, this is called, sire, cover your ass, and I was covering mine with a steel-plated armor. For the next 4 months, the office became a surreal place. While the foundation of our entire financial system was basically built on quicksand, I spent 40 hours a week making sure that when a user transferred money, a digital confetti cannon went off on their screen. I designed a daily streak system where you got bonus points for sending money to your friends 5 days in a row. It was like I was building a casino instead of a bank. One of my junior developers, a bright girl named Sarah, came to me about 6 weeks before the launch. She looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days. Op, she whispered, pulling me into a private breakout room. I was doing some stress testing on the API, and I found something terrifying. If a user triggers a cross-border transfer during a high-latency window, the balance doesn't deduct correctly. I just managed to create 10,000 fake dollars in a test account. We need to fix this right now. I looked at Sarah. She was young, idealistic, and she actually cared about the company. I felt bad for what I was about to say. Sarah, I said, I know, I found that bug months ago. Her eyes went wide. Then why haven't we patched it? It's 3 lines of code in the validation layer. Because, I replied, showing her Chad's printed email, the VP of engineering gave me a direct, written order to not touch the core ledger. He wants balloons and confetti, so we are giving him balloons and confetti. Sarah stared at the paper. But the company will go under. If the public finds this, we'll lose our banking license. People will lose their savings. The company has insurance for that, I said, sounding colder than I felt. And Chad has stock options he wants to sell. If you try to fix it, you're violating a direct order from an executive. Do you want to get fired today, or do you want to get your launch bonus and look for a new job in November? She didn't like it, but she understood. We spent the rest of the month building avatar customizations for the user profiles. As the launch date approached, the hype was insane. Our CEO was on the cover of Forbes. We were being called the Uber of banking. The marketing team spent $50 million on a Super Bowl-style ad campaign, but I was looking at a very specific date on the calendar, June 30th. You see, June 30th wasn't just our global launch day. It was also a day that featured a leap second. For those who don't know, every few years, the International Earth Rotation and Reference System Service adds a single second to our clocks to keep UTC in sync with the Earth's rotation. Most software handles it fine, but our ledger, the one Chad told me not to touch, relied on a very specific, very buggy timestamp synchronization method. I knew that during that leap second, when the clock hit 23:59:60, the double counting bug wouldn't just be an edge case. It would become a systemic loop. I tried one last time. 3 days before launch, I pulled Chad into his glass-walled office. Chad, seriously, there's a leap second on launch night. The ledger's going to desync. We can still push a hotfix if we do it tonight. Chad didn't even look up from his phone. He was busy looking at photos of a yacht he was planning to buy with his IPO money. Op, you're such a Debbie Downer. The marketing is done. The press is at the door. We change one line of code now. We have to recertify with the regulators, and that takes weeks. Stop being a nerd and go put on your company t-shirt. We're making history. All right, Chad, I said. History it is. Launch night was a massive party at a rooftop bar in San Francisco. There were celebrities, expensive champagne, and giant screens showing the live transaction count. The app went live at 9:00 p.m. By 11:00 p.m., we had 1 million users. The CEO was giving a speech about financial democracy. Chad was standing next to him, beaming, telling everyone how he personally oversaw the technical architecture. I stood in the corner holding a water and looking at my watch. 11:59:58, 11:59:59, 11:59:60. The leap second on the giant screen, the total transaction volume was at $40 million. Suddenly, the number jumped, $80 million. $160 million, $500 million. The crowd cheered. They thought it was a surge in users. They thought we were going viral. The CEO started laughing and hugging people, but I looked at the liquidity pool metric on my phone, a number that wasn't on the big screen. It was plummeting. The bug had been triggered. Because of the leap second, every transaction happening in that window was being echoed back into the system. The API was seeing a transfer, adding the money to the recipient, but forgetting to subtract it from the sender because the timestamp was invalid according to the ledger's logic. Basically, the app was printing free money, and the high-frequency trading bots, the ones that scan new APIs for vulnerabilities, had found it within milliseconds. I saw Chad's face change. He was looking at his own tablet. He finally noticed the liquidity numbers. He looked over at me, his eyes filled with a sudden, sharp terror. I didn't say a word. I just raised my glass of water and took a sip. The history he wanted to make was finally happening, and it was going to cost about $1 billion. The rooftop party didn't stop immediately. That was the most surreal part. While $1 billion financial engine was essentially tearing itself apart in the digital background, people were still clinking glasses of $500 champagne and dancing to a DJ. The CEO was still laughing, oblivious, but Chad looked like he was about to have a heart attack. He stumbled over to me, pushing through a group of investors. His face was no longer that smug tech bro tan, it was a sickly grayish-white. He grabbed my arm so hard I thought he'd bruise it. Op, he hissed, his voice cracking. The liquidity dashboard, it's showing a negative drift. It says we've dispersed $300 million more than we've collected in the last 12 minutes. What is happening? Fix it now. I looked down at my watch. Well, Chad, it's currently 12:15 a.m. The leap second occurred exactly 15 minutes ago. Remember that theoretical edge case we talked about, the one involving the timestamp synchronization in the core ledger? It appears it's no longer theoretical. I don't care about the nerd speak, he yelled, attracting a few confused looks from nearby guests. Just log in and kill the process. Roll back the ledger. I took a slow sip of my water. I can't do that, Chad. You gave me a direct written order, which I confirmed via email if you recall, to not touch the core ledger. You told me it was production ready and that my team needed to focus 100% on the gamification and UI. If I touched the ledger now, I'd be violating an executive directive. I thought we were winning the launch. Chad's eyes bulged. Are you insane? The company is bleeding out. Don't stop this, there won't be a company tomorrow. I'm authorizing you to fix it. Do it now. I'm going to need that authorization in writing, Chad, I said calmly. And I'll need a full project brief explaining why we're diverting resources away from the transaction celebration animations you were so excited about. He actually growled. He snatched a napkin from a passing waiter, grabbed a pen from his pocket, and scribbled, "Authorized ledger fix now, Chad," in messy, frantic letters. I looked at the napkin. This isn't a formal JIRA ticket, Chad, but since it's an emergency, I'll see what I can do. I walked over to a quiet corner of the rooftop, opened my laptop, and dialed into our secure server. Sarah, my junior dev, was already on the bridge. She sounded like she was crying. Op, are you seeing this? It's a loop. Every time a bot hits the endpoint, the ledger it just adds a zero. We've lost 400 million. I tried to shut down the API gateway, but the autoscale feature Chad insisted on is keeping it alive. It thinks the high traffic is success and is spinning up more servers to handle the demand. Don't panic, Sarah, I said. I'm going to initiate a hard kill on the database clusters. It's going to crash the app for every user globally, but it's the only way to stop the bleeding. Wait, Sarah shouted. If you do a hard kill now, the unsynchronized data will be corrupted. We'll never know which transactions were real and which ones were the bug. We won't be able to recover the money. I know, I said, but every second we wait, another $10 million vanishes into a black hole in the Cayman Islands or a crypto wallet in Eastern Europe. Chad wanted history. We're giving him a disaster for the textbooks. I hit the execute key. On the giant screen behind the CEO, the live transaction count suddenly froze. Then the entire display turned bright red with a system error 500 message. The music stopped. The DJ looked confused. The CEO, who was in the middle of telling a joke to a New York Times reporter, turned around and stared at the screen. A heavy, terrifying silence fell over the rooftop. "Chad," the CEO called out, his voice booming. "What's going on with the board? Is this a prank? A celebratory system reset?" Chad was nowhere to be found. He had bolted for the elevator, probably trying to get to his car before the board members realized he was the one who had signed off on the production-ready status of the broken code. I stayed. I didn't run. I sat there in the corner with my laptop, watching the logs as the system drew its final, shuddering breaths. Within 30 minutes, the party had turned into a war room. The celebrity guests were ushered out, and the C-suite, the CEO, the CFO, and the head of legal, gathered around a small table in the VIP lounge. They called me over. The CEO looked like he had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. "Op," he said, his voice trembling. "Give it to me straight. How much?" "The preliminary audit shows we dispersed approximately $780 million in phantom funds before I was able to kill the clusters," I said. "Because the ledger was corrupted during the leap second desync, about 60% of our transaction history for the last hour is unrecoverable. We don't know who has the money, and since it went through the Global Payments API to external banks, we can't just cancel it. That money is gone." The CFO put his head in his hands and literally started sobbing. $780 million was more than our entire Series C funding. "We were for all intents and purposes bankrupt. How did this happen?" the CEO whispered. "We had audits, we had QA processes. Chad told me the system was bulletproof." I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. I had been preparing for this moment for 4 months. "Actually, sir," I said, placing the printed email chain on the table, "I flagged this specific bug on February 12th. I provided a full technical report on the leap second vulnerability. I requested 3 weeks of dev time to rewrite the ledger logic. Chad gave me a direct, written order to ignore the bug and focus on gamification, because he didn't want to delay the launch and hurt the stock valuation." The head of legal grabbed the emails and started reading. Her face went from pale to "someone is going to prison" red. "He ordered you to ignore a core ledger vulnerability?" she asked, looking at me. "He told me it was a theoretical nerd problem, and that we needed balloons and confetti for the investors," I replied. "I have the Slack logs, the emails, and even a recorded Zoom call where he told me that if I touched the ledger I'd be fired for insubordination." The CEO looked at the emails. He looked at the system error screen, then he looked at the head of legal. "Find Chad," the CEO said, his voice cold as ice, "and call the FBI. We need to report a massive corporate negligence and potential securities fraud." But Chad was already gone. He'd cleared out his desk and was halfway to the airport. But he forgot one thing. He was a tech bro, but I was the engineer. And I had gamified his company laptop months ago. So Chad thought he was the smartest guy in the room because he had an MBA and a collection of expensive watches. But he forgot one fundamental rule of the tech world. Never, ever piss off the person who holds the root password to your digital life. 6 months ago, when Chad had demanded a custom executive dashboard on his company-issued MacBook Pro, he wanted it to show him real-time stock prices, his projected net worth after the IPO, and a heat map of our global expansion. I'd built it for him, but I'd also bundled it with a very specific security enhancement that I called the Executive Safeguard. In reality, it was a glorified tracker with a remote wipe and remote lock feature that only I had the key to. Chad had signed off on it because I'd told him it was essential for protecting sensitive company data from corporate espionage. He loved the idea of being so important that he needed high-level encryption. As the CEO and the head of legal were arguing about whether to call the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, immediately or wait until morning, I pulled up my own terminal. I saw a ping from Chad's laptop. He was at San Francisco International Airport SFO, connected to the SFO guest Wi-Fi. I turned my laptop screen toward the CEO. "Sir," I said, "Chad is at Terminal 3. He's booked a one-way flight to Dubai that leaves in 45 minutes. And he has his company laptop with him, which contains every unencrypted file of our core architecture." The CEO's face went from pale to a terrifying shade of purple. "Can you stop him?" "I can't stop his body from getting on a plane," I replied, "but I can make sure his laptop is as useful as a $3,000 paperweight, and I can keep his GPS location live for the authorities." "Do it," the CEO barked. I hit a few keys. I initiated a kernel panic on Chad's machine. It wasn't a wipe yet. I wanted the data to stay there so the FBI could retrieve it later. I just locked the screen with a very specific message that would stay on until the battery died. The message read, "Directive violation detected. Please contact Senior BACK&D Engineering for Core Ledger Authorization." It was the ultimate middle finger. While the CEO was on the phone with the airport police, I went back to the war room. Sarah was still there, sitting on a beanbag chair, looking absolutely defeated. "Op," she said. Her voice small. "What happens now? We're broke, right? The company is dead." I sat down next to her. The company as we know it is probably dead, Sarah. We'll be in receivership by Monday. The VCs will try to claw back what they can. But you're going to be fine. You're a junior dev who discovered $1 billion bug and tried to fix it. You have a paper trail of integrity. I've already copied all your internal memos and JIRA tickets where you raised concerns. You're going to be the hero in the post-mortem. She looked at me confused. And what about you? I'm the guy who followed orders, I said with a grim smile. Maliciously, I'll probably be blacklisted by some of the tech bro VCs, but honestly, I'm tired of building confetti cannons for people who don't know how a database works. The next few hours were a blur. The FBI arrived at the rooftop bar around 3 a.m. They weren't interested in the champagne, they wanted my logs. I handed over a hard drive I'd already prepared, the Audit of Doom. It contained every single time I'd warned Chad about the leap second, every rejected pull request, and every email where he'd told me to gamify instead of fix. The lead agent looked at the data and then looked at me. You knew this was going to happen tonight, didn't you? I knew it was a mathematical certainty, I replied. I didn't know how much the bots would take, but I knew the system would fail. I told the VP of engineering. He told me to ignore it. You could have fixed it anyway, the agent said, testing me. And I would have been fired for insubordination and likely sued for sabotaging the launch if any minor glitch happened later, I countered. I am a senior engineer. I follow the technical requirements set by my superiors. My superior required balloons and confetti. I provided exactly what was asked for. The irony started to sink in for the rest of the C-suite as they sat there. The balloons and confetti features, the ones Chad had prioritized, were actually making the recovery impossible. You see, Chad had insisted that every transaction trigger a celebration event in our database to track user joy. Because the bug was causing millions of phantom transactions, the database was now clogged with billions of joy events. We couldn't even see the actual financial data because the confetti logs were 10 times larger than the transaction logs. We were literally drowning in digital confetti. Around 5 a.m., the CEO got a call. The airport police had detained Chad at the gate. Apparently, he'd started screaming at a TSA agent because his laptop had glitched, and he couldn't access his digital boarding pass or his crypto wallet keys. When the police saw the message on his screen about directive violations, they knew they had their man. Chad was brought back to the city in handcuffs, but the damage to the company was done. By Saturday morning, news of the $1 billion leap second had leaked to the press. Our Uber of banking status vanished instantly. Users were frantically trying to withdraw their money, but since the system was hard-killed, they couldn't. I spent the weekend in the office with the FBI and the SEC auditors. We were trying to untangle the mess, but it was like trying to unbake a cake. The money had been moved through so many intermediary banks in that 1 hour that we were looking at years of international litigation to get even a fraction of it back. On Monday morning, I walked into the office to find a closed sign on the front door. The board had declared Chapter 11. I went to my desk, packed my mechanical keyboard and my favorite mug, and started to leave. I saw the CEO standing by the window of the empty lobby. He looked like a ghost. "Op," he called out as I reached the door. "Wait," I turned around. "If I'd listened to you back in February," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "we'd be billionaires today. We'd be the most successful fintech in history." "If you'd listened to me," I said, "you wouldn't have had $1 billion launch party. You would have had a quiet, boring software update, but you wanted the wow factor, and you got it. Everyone in the world is talking about us today." I walked out, but here's the kicker. The story doesn't end with the company's bankruptcy, because remember how I mentioned the gamification features? Well, I'd built one very specific feature that Chad had absolutely loved. It was called the Founder's Legacy. It was a hidden Easter egg in the code that would display the names of the architecture team in a golden, shimmering font if the company ever hit a $10 billion valuation. Well, because of the bug, the system thought we had hit a $10 billion valuation for about 30 seconds during the crash. And that Easter egg wasn't just a visual thing. It was hard-coded to trigger a social media blast to every major tech news outlet, bragging about the genius of Chad. So while Chad was being processed in county jail, every tech blog in the world received an automated press release from our system, detailing how Chad had personally designed the revolutionary ledger that was currently responsible for the largest financial collapse in startup history. I'd made sure he got exactly what he wanted, all the credit. But wait, there's a part of this story that I haven't told anyone yet. Not the FBI, not Sarah, and definitely not the CEO. It involves that leap second and a very specific private digital wallet that I'd set up 3 years ago as a stress test account. Alright, so here's the part of the story that I've kept under wraps for a long time. You see, when you're building a global financial engine, you have to have honeypots and overflow buckets. It's standard practice. These are isolated accounts used to catch stray data packets or transactions that fail validation but still result in a fund disbursement. They're essentially digital safety nets so that money doesn't just vanish into the ether, it goes into a holding state. 3 years ago, during the very first beta test of our ledger, I'd set up one of these holding state accounts. I'd called it Project Chimera. To anyone looking at the database architecture, it just looked like a legacy testing module that was no longer active. Even the automated audits ignored it because it was flagged as a non-production asset. When the leap second hit at 23:59:60 and the system started its double-counting loop, it wasn't just the high-frequency trading bots that noticed. My Chimera script, which I'd forgotten to disable, noticed too. While $780 million was being siphoned off by external bots and legitimate-looking but buggy transfers, the Chimera script was doing what it was programmed to do. It was catching orphan transactions that the main ledger couldn't reconcile. Because the main ledger was desinced, it was throwing off thousands of orphans every second, and they were all falling into the Chimera bucket. By the time I hit the execute key to kill the servers at 12:15 a.m., the Chimera account wasn't empty. It was sitting on exactly $12.4 million. Now I want to be clear, I didn't steal this money. Technically, the money was parked in a company-owned testing module. But because Chad had ordered me to never touch the core ledger and had essentially stripped my team of administrative oversight for the launch, the credentials to access the Chimera module were, well, they were unique to me. They weren't in the central key vault that the FBI and the SEC were now auditing. On Monday morning, after I packed my keyboard and left the CEO standing in that empty lobby, I went to a local park, sat on a bench, and opened my personal laptop. I connected to a secure, encrypted node I'd set up months prior. I looked at the $12.4 million sitting in the Chimera account. I had a choice. I could call the SEC right then and say, hey, I found another $12 million in a hidden testing bucket. I'd be a bigger hero, sure. But then I thought about Chad. I thought about the CEO who wanted a wow factor more than a safe bank. I thought about the venture capitalists who were already planning to sue every single employee, including the juniors like Sarah, to get their Series C money back. If I gave that $12.4 million back to the company, it wouldn't go to the users who lost money. It would go to the lawyers. It would go to the VCs. It would be swallowed by the same tech bro machine that had ignored my warnings for 6 months. I looked at the confetti logs. They were a masterpiece of obfuscation. There were so many joy events and celebration triggers that tracing the Chimera transactions would be like trying to find a specific grain of sand in a desert during a sandstorm. I didn't move the money to a private bank. I didn't buy a Ferrari. Instead, I did something a bit more, engineer style. I wrote a script that broke that $12.4 million into tiny, untraceable fragments, about $50 each. Then I cross-referenced our user database for every retail user, the regular people who had tried to use the app for small transfers and got their accounts frozen during the crash. I didn't give the money to myself. I sent it back to them. Over the next 48 hours, while the news was screaming about the billion-dollar bankruptcy, about 240,000 regular users suddenly saw a manual adjustment in their external bank accounts. It wasn't a lot, but for most of them, it covered the money they'd lost in the phantom transaction glitch. The confetti logs provided the perfect cover. To any auditor, it just looked like the system had glitched one last time and pushed out a bunch of small, random refunds before dying completely. The SEC actually mentioned it in their final report. They called it a final unexplained surge of chaotic ledger activity caused by the catastrophic failure of the core synchronization logic. I smiled when I read that. Chaotic ledger activity. That's one way to put it. The rest of the story is pretty standard for Silicon Valley. The company was liquidated. Chad was eventually sentenced to 4 years in federal prison for gross negligence and falsifying corporate records because of those emails and the production-ready lies. The CEO was barred from ever serving as an officer of a public company again. Sarah, my junior dev, actually ended up doing great. She got hired by a major cybersecurity firm specifically because of her role in the post-mortem. Apparently the firm loved the fact that she had the integrity to raise the alarm, even when her boss told her not to. I wrote her a glowing letter of recommendation. As for me, I didn't get fired, but I didn't get hired either. I took a sabbatical. I moved to a small cabin in the woods, far away from San Francisco and the tech bro culture. I spend my days working on open source projects, stuff that actually matters, like encryption for activists and data privacy tools. Occasionally, I'll see a Chad in a coffee shop, wearing a vest and talking about disrupting the space with some new AI-driven crypto scam. I just look at my watch, wait for the second hand to tick, and think about the leap second. The billion-dollar bug wasn't just a technical failure. It was a failure of ego. Chad thought he could outrun the math. He thought that if the UI looked pretty enough, the backend wouldn't matter. He learned the hard way that in the world of engineering, gravity always wins, and that's where this story ends. The company is a ghost, the money is a memory, and Chad is probably still trying to figure out how to gamify his prison cell. Man, that is malicious compliance at its absolute peak. We're drowning in digital confetti. I can just imagine those FBI agents trying to find the financial data under billions of joy events. It's poetic, honestly. If you're an engineer or a dev listening to this, I bet you've had a Chad in your life at some point. Hopefully yours didn't cost $1 billion though. Alright everyone, we're moving into our final story for the night. We've covered HOA wars and corporate meltdowns. For this last one, we're getting personal. This is a story about a family inheritance, a hidden safe, and a relative who tried to use traditional values to steal a fortune from their own siblings. This one was sent in by a woman whose grandfather left behind a massive estate, but with a very specific, very cryptic set of instructions that nearly tore her family apart. If you've ever had a crazy aunt or a greedy cousin who comes out of the woodwork the second someone mentions a will, this one is going to hit close to home. Here is the grandfather's final puzzle. My grandfather, whom I'll call Pop, was a man of two things: extreme wealth and extreme eccentricity. He was a self-made man who had made a fortune in the manufacturing business in the 60s and 70s, but he lived like a hermit on a massive 500-acre farm in the middle of nowhere. He didn't trust banks, he didn't trust lawyers, and most of all, he didn't trust his own children. Pop had 3 kids, my dad, the oldest, my Aunt Linda, and my Uncle Steve. My dad was the reliable one. He worked a normal job, raised me and my brother, and never asked Pop for a dime. Aunt Linda was the socialite. She'd been through 4 marriages, lived in a penthouse she couldn't afford, and was always one investment opportunity away from bankruptcy. Uncle Steve was the drifter. He'd moved from state to state, starting businesses that always failed, and only showed up at the farm when he needed a loan. When Pop passed away at the age of 92, the atmosphere at the funeral wasn't one of grief. It was one of anticipation. I remember sitting in the front row, looking at Aunt Linda. She was wearing a black veil that looked like it belonged at a royal funeral, but she was busy scrolling through luxury real estate listings on her phone. Uncle Steve was outside in the parking lot, already arguing with someone on his cell about repaying them with interest by the end of the month. Only my dad looked truly sad. He'd spent every Sunday for 20 years at that farm, just sitting on the porch with Pop, not saying much, just keeping him company. After the burial, we all gathered at Pop's old farmhouse for the reading of the will. We expected a lawyer to show up with a briefcase. Instead, there was just an old, battered envelope taped to the kitchen table. On the front, in Pop's shaky handwriting, it said, "For the children, don't call a lawyer until you open the safe." Aunt Linda practically shoved my dad out of the way to grab the envelope. The safe, I knew it, he kept it all in the safe. Now everyone in the family knew about the safe. It was a massive 19th century iron beast bolted to the floor of Pop's basement. It was the size of a refrigerator and supposedly contained the family legacy. Linda tore open the envelope, expecting a combination. Instead, she pulled out a single sheet of paper with a riddle on it. It said, "To the one who stayed when the sun was high, I leave the land and the open sky. To the ones who came when the rain began, I leave the truth of a tired man. The code is hidden where the time stands still, and the key is held by the one with the will." Uncle Steve scoffed. "What is this, a treasure hunt? I don't have time for games, just give me the combination." "It's not a game, Steve," my dad said quietly. "It's how Pop was." He wanted to make sure whoever got the money actually understood what it took to earn it. But Aunt Linda wasn't listening. She was already headed for the basement. She'd brought a literal locksmith with her. She'd actually hired a professional safe cracker to be on call for the day of the funeral. "Linda, you can't be serious," my dad said, following her down the stairs. "The will says to find the code. You can't just drill into Pop's safe." "Watch me," Linda snapped. "I have bills to pay, and I'm not waiting for some senile riddle to solve itself." "Locksmith, get down here." The locksmith looked at the safe and whistled. "Ma'am, this is a Diebold antique. If I try to drill this without the blueprints, I'll trigger the relockers and you'll never get it open without TNT. It'll take me 3 days just to prep it." Linda turned red. She looked at the riddle again. "Where the time stands still." "Steve, go check the grandfather clock in the hallway, Dad. Go check the old sundial in the garden." And just like that, the puzzle had begun. But what my aunt and uncle didn't realize was that Pop hadn't just hidden a code. He'd hidden a trap for the greedy. While Linda and Steve were tearing the house apart, my dad just sat in Pop's old leather armchair in the study, staring at the riddle. He wasn't looking for a piece of paper, he was trying to remember a conversation. "Dad, are you okay?" I asked, sitting on the footstool next to him. "I'm fine, honey," he said, rubbing his eyes. "I'm just thinking. Pop used to say that people only see what they want to see. Linda sees a jackpot, Steve sees a get-out-of-jail-free card, but Pop saw a legacy. He hated that his kids only visited when they needed something." Suddenly, a scream echoed from the hallway. It was Aunt Linda. "I found it. I found the first part." We ran into the hall. Linda was standing on a chair, reaching behind the massive, ornate grandfather clock that stood near the entrance. She pulled out a small, yellowed envelope that had been taped to the back of the mahogany casing. Steve practically tackled her to see what was inside. "Open it. What does it say?" Linda tore it open. Inside was a small brass key and another note. It said, "Greed opens the door to a hollow room. Patience opens the door to the harvest. Choose your path, for the clock has stopped at the hour of your birth." "The hour of my birth," Steve muttered. "Was born at 4:15. Linda, you were 2:00 a.m. Dad was, what, 8:00 p.m. "No, you idiot," Linda snapped. "The grandfather clock, look at the hands." The clock had been broken for as long as I could remember. The hands were frozen at exactly 10:10. 10:10. Linda started spinning the dial on the safe in the basement. Left to 10, right to 10. Maybe it's 10, 10, 10. The locksmith, who was still standing there looking awkward, stepped forward. Ma'am, I wouldn't do that. These old deboard safes have relockers. If you put in the wrong code 3 times, a glass plate inside shatters and drops a steel bolt into the gears. After that, the only way in is a plasma cutter and you'll burn whatever is inside. I don't care, Linda yelled. 10, 10, 10, try it. The locksmith sighed and turned the dial. Click, 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 nothing. The handle didn't budge. Try 22 10 64, Steve shouted. That's Pop's birthday. Click, click. Click, still nothing. One more try, ma'am, the locksmith warned. Then I'm leaving because I'm not being held responsible when this thing turns into a tomb. While they were arguing, I looked at the brass key Linda was holding. It was tiny, too small for a door, too small for a chest. It looked like a key for a jewelry box or a diary. I walked back into the study. Pop had a wall of books, thousands of them, but there was one shelf that was different. It wasn't filled with leather-bound classics. It was filled with old ledgers, handwritten records of every crop, every sale, and every expense from the farm going back to 1955. I started looking at the spines. 1970, 1982, 1995. Then I saw it, a ledger that didn't have a year on it. It just said, "The will." I pulled it down. It was locked with a tiny brass latch. "Dad," I whispered. "Look." My dad walked over, his eyes widening. He took the ledger from me. I remember him writing in this. He used to call it his account of life. He said it was the only book where the math always added up. We didn't tell Linda or Steve. We knew if they saw us, they'd snatch it away. We went out to the back porch where the sun was starting to set over the fields. "The key is held by the one with the will," I muttered. Pop didn't mean the legal will. He meant this book. Dad used the tiny key Linda had found behind the clock. She dropped it in her excitement and the latch clicked open. But it wasn't a list of bank accounts. It wasn't a map to a hidden gold mine. The first page was a photo of my dad as a little boy, standing in a field of wheat. Underneath, Pop had written, "To my son who understood that a farm isn't just dirt and seeds. It's time. You gave me yours, and for that I give you the truth." Then there was a table of numbers. It looked like a complicated math problem. 158.42 plus 11, 204 plus 88.12. "What is this?" I asked. "It's not math," Dad said, his voice trembling. "Look at the coordinates at the top of the page." He pointed to a set of numbers, 42.3481. "Those are GPS coordinates," I said. I pulled out my phone and typed them in. The map zoomed in, and in, and in, until it landed right on the old oak tree at the edge of the property, the one with the tire swing where Dad and I used to play. "The code isn't in the house," Dad said. "The code is under the tree." But as we stood up to go to the tree, we heard a massive bang from the basement. It sounded like a gunshot. Then Aunt Linda's voice, shrieking in pure, unadulterated rage. "You broke it, you broke the safe." "I told you," the locksmith yelled back. "The relocker triggered, that's it, it's sealed shut." Steve was screaming too. "There goes our money. You killed the legacy, Linda. You killed it." Dad and I looked at each other. We realized that Pop's safe wasn't a vault for his money. It was a vault for his garbage. Pop had spent 40 years watching his kids treat him like an ATM. He knew exactly what they would do the moment he was gone. He'd built that 19th century beast as a deke, a literal greed trap. "Let's go to the tree," Dad said quietly. We walked out into the field, leaving the sounds of the screaming match behind us. We reached the old oak tree, and Dad knelt down at the base. He started digging with his bare hands near a large, flat stone. After a few inches, he hit something hard, a small plastic Tupperware container. Inside was a single, modern thumb drive and a handwritten note. "The safe in the basement is filled with bricks and old newspapers. I bought it at an auction for $500 just to see who would try to break it first. If you're reading this, you're the one who followed the riddle. You're the one who cared about the why instead of the how much. The drive contains the login for a trust account in Switzerland. It's not $1 billion, but it's enough to keep the farm running for 3 generations. Use it well. P.S. Don't tell Linda. Let her keep trying to open the safe. It'll give her something to do other than spend money she didn't earn." Dad started laughing. He sat there in the dirt, clutching that thumb drive, and laughed until he cried. But then the story took a dark turn, because Aunt Linda hadn't given up. She had seen us walking toward the tree, and she was coming across the field with a shovel, her eyes wild with a terrifying, desperate greed. "I saw that. I saw you digging." Linda's voice was high-pitched, vibrating with a kind of hysterical energy. She was still 100 yards away, but she was sprinting through the tall grass, the heavy iron shovel trailing behind her like a weapon. Behind her, Uncle Steve was stumbling along, trying to keep up. "What did they find, Linda? Did they find the gold?" My dad didn't panic. He slowly stood up, wiped the dirt from his jeans, and slipped the Tupperware container into the oversized pocket of his work jacket. He looked at me and whispered, "Don't say a word about the Swiss account. Not a word." Linda reached us first. She was gasping for air, her face slick with sweat and smeared with basement dust. She looked like a grave robber. She pointed the shovel at my dad's chest. "Give it to me, David. I know you found something. I saw the box." "It's just some old photos and a note, Linda," Dad said, his voice remarkably steady. "Pop wanted me to have some things from the house." "Liar," she shrieked. She lunged forward, trying to reach into his pocket. Dad stepped back, his face hardening. Linda, stop. You just spent 3 hours trying to break into a safe that Pop literally filled with trash to prove a point. Don't you get it? He knew you'd do this. He knew you'd come for the money before the body was even cold. Steve caught up then, doubled over and clutching his knees. Come on, Dave. We're a family. We're supposed to split everything 3 ways. That was the deal. Traditional values, right? The kids share the legacy. Traditional values. I couldn't help it. The words just came out. Steve, you haven't been back to this farm in 5 years. The last time you called Pop, it was to ask for $50,000 for a cryptomining operation in a garage. You didn't even come for his 90th birthday. Stay out of this, kid. Linda snapped at me. She turned back to Dad, her eyes narrowing. If you don't show us what's in that box, I'm calling the police. I'll tell them you're stealing assets from the estate before probate. I'll tie you up in court for 10 years, David. I'll make sure nobody gets a penny if I don't get my share. It was the ultimate Linda move. She'd rather burn the whole forest down than let someone else have a tree she thought was hers. Dad looked at her for a long time. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He didn't want the money for himself, he wanted to save the farm. But he knew that if he told them about the Swiss Trust, they'd find a way to drain it in 6 months. Fine, Dad said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the Tupperware. Linda snatched it so fast she almost fell over. Steve crowded around her. They tore the lid off, expecting stacks of $100 bills or a map to a buried chest. Instead, they saw the thumb drive. A computer stick, Steve muttered, looking deflated. What is it? A password. It's a digital key, Dad said, sticking to the partial truth. Pop mentioned he had some Bitcoin or something, but it's encrypted. He didn't give me the password. I'll find it, Linda yelled. I'll hire a hacker, I'll get into it. She clutched the thumb drive like it was a holy relic. This is mine now. Since you found the ledger, I get the drive. That's fair. Linda, you don't even know how to open a PDF, Dad said dryly. I don't care, Steve, get the car. We're going back to the city. We're finding someone who can crack this. They turned and ran back toward the house, leaving us standing in the twilight. They didn't even say goodbye. They didn't even ask about the note or the ledger. They just wanted the digital gold. I looked at my dad. Why did you let her take it? That's the access to the Swiss Trust. Dad smiled, and for the first time he looked exactly like Pop. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a second thumb drive. Wait, what? I gasped. Pop was an engineer, honey, Dad whispered. He knew Linda and Steve would be watching. The container under the tree had 2 drives in it. The one Linda took is a deco. It's filled with thousands of folders, all labeled bank access or account details. But every single one of them is empty, and if you try to brute force the password more than 5 times, it triggers a script that sends an automated email to the IRS reporting potential unexplained foreign income for whoever is currently logged into the drive. I stared at him. Pop reported them to the IRS. He didn't report them, Dad corrected. He set it up so they would report themselves by trying to steal something that wasn't theirs. The drive I'm holding, this is the real one, but it's not just a password, it's a multi-factor authentication system. What does that mean? It means, Dad said, looking back at the dark farmhouse, that to unlock the actual trust, I need 3 things. I need this drive, I need the ledger you found, and I need a physical key that Pop hid in the one place he knew Linda and Steve would never look. Where? In the middle of the north pasture, Dad said. Under the salt lick for the cattle. I laughed. The cattle? Pop had hundreds of cows, and the salt lick was a massive, heavy block of mineral salt sitting in a mud pit. Linda wouldn't go near that field in her $1,000 boots if her life depended on it. But as we started walking toward the north pasture, we saw headlights. A truck was pulling into the gate. It wasn't Linda or Steve. It was a black SUV with tinted windows, and it was followed by another one. Dad, I whispered, who is that? The SUV stopped right in front of us. 4 men in suits got out. They didn't look like family and they didn't look like lawyers. They looked like problem solvers. One of them, a tall man with a cold professional smile, stepped forward. Mr. David, my name is Mr. Vance. We represent a group of investors who were, shall we say, business partners with your father. We believe he was holding onto some proprietary data that belongs to our firm. We've been informed that a device was recently recovered from this property. We'd like to discuss its return. Quietly, Mr. Vance didn't look like a man who spent much time in the dirt. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, and his suit probably cost more than my first car. But there was something about the way he stood, still, patient, and completely unimpressed by the vastness of the farm, that made my stomach do a slow, nauseating flip. Proprietary data? My dad asked, his voice dropping into that low, dangerous tone he used when he was truly angry. My father was a farmer. He grew corn and raised cattle. He didn't deal in data. Vance smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Your father was many things, David. He was a brilliant engineer, a pioneer in automated logistics, and in his later years a very successful silent partner in several sensitive manufacturing algorithms. He was also, unfortunately, a man who became increasingly paranoid. He sequestered certain digital keys that belong to our firm, keys that represent a significant amount of capital. He didn't trust you, I blurted out. Vance looked at me, tilting his head slightly. Smart girl. No, he didn't. He thought we were moving too fast. He wanted to ensure his legacy was protected from what he called corporate vultures. But we're not vultures, David. We're investors, and we want what's ours. One of the men behind Vance shifted his jacket, just enough for me to see the holstered sidearm. These weren't problem solvers in a metaphorical sense. They were mercenaries. We saw your sister leave in a hurry, Vance continued, stepping closer. She seemed very protective of a small plastic container. We have people following her now. But something tells me your father wouldn't have given the real prize to a woman who can't distinguish a motherboard from a cutting board. He would have given it to you, the son who stayed. Dad reached out and put a hand on my shoulder, pulling me slightly behind him. I don't know what you're talking about. We found some old family photos, that's it. Don't insult my intelligence, David, Vance said, his voice losing its polite edge. The ledger, the drive, and whatever else is hidden in that puzzle he spent 10 years designing. We know about the riddles, we know about the safe. We've been monitoring this property for months. Hand over the drive and we leave, no harm, no mess. I felt my dad's fingers tighten on my shoulder. I knew what he was thinking. He had the real drive in one pocket and the ledger in the other. If he gave them up, we were safe, but Pop's life work and the money meant to save the farm would be gone. If he didn't, well, we were a long way from the nearest neighbor. The drive is in the house, Dad said suddenly, on the kitchen table. My sister took a decoy, but I kept the primary backup. If you want it, take it. Just let my daughter go to her car. Vance looked at me, then back at Dad. He gestured to one of his men. Go with the girl to her car. Most of us will go to the house with David. No, Dad said firmly. She goes alone. I stay here. You get the drive when she's at the gate. Vance sighed, checking his watch. You're stalling, David, and I hate stalling. Check him. Before Dad could react, two of the men grabbed him. He fought, but they were younger and trained for this. They reached into his pockets and pulled out the real thumb drive and the yellowed ledger. Vance took them, inspecting the ledger with a look of reverence. The account of life. Finally, he looked at the thumb drive. And the key. You've got what you want, Dad spat, trying to wrench his arms free. Now get off my land. Vance looked at the ledger, flipping through the pages. He stopped at the table of numbers, the math problem I had seen earlier. He frowned. There's a third component, a physical token, the master salt. Where is it? Dad didn't say anything. He just glared at Vance. The riddle, Vance muttered, reading from a small notebook he pulled from his pocket. He had a copy of Pop's riddle. The key is held by the one with the will, and the truth is buried where the salt meets the stone. He looked toward the north pasture. He looked at the cattle grazing in the distance, their eyes reflecting the moonlight like tiny, ghostly orbs. The salt lick, Vance whispered. He looked at his men. Bring them, we're going for a walk. They marched us out into the field. The grass was wet with dew and the air was getting colder. I could hear the rhythmic clink-clink of the men's gear as we walked. My mind was racing. I looked at the cattle. They were restless, sensing the tension. Pop had always said that cattle were smarter than people gave them credit for. He'd also said they were incredibly protective of their territory at night. We reached the salt lick, a massive 50-pound block of mineral salt sitting on a weathered wooden stump in the middle of a muddy patch. Vance gestured to the stump. Dig. One of the men produced a folding shovel and started hacking at the mud beneath the salt block. After a few minutes, he hit something solid. He reached in and pulled out a heavy cast-iron skeleton key wrapped in oilcloth. Vance took it, his eyes gleaming. The set is complete, the drive, the ledger, and the physical bypass. He looked at us, and for the first time I saw a flicker of genuine malice. You've been very helpful, David, truly. But unfortunately, silent partners prefer to stay silent, and heirs, well, heirs are just loose ends. He nodded to his men. One of them stepped forward, reaching for the weapon at his hip. Wait, I screamed. Look at the cows, everyone turned. The cattle, nearly 200 head of Black Angus, had stopped grazing. They were standing in a perfect wide circle around us, about 30 yards out. They weren't moving, they were just staring. And they were lowering their heads, huffing rhythmic bursts of steam into the cold air. It's just livestock, kid, one of the men laughed. Pop didn't just raise them for meat, Dad said, his voice low and steady. He trained them. He used a high-frequency whistle for feeding, for herding, and for security. Dad reached into his collar and pulled out a small, silver whistle I'd never seen before. He'd been wearing it under his shirt the whole time. Vance's eyes went wide. Stop him. But it was too late. Dad blew a sharp, silent burst into the night air. To the humans, it was nothing. But to the 200 head of cattle, it was a war cry. The circle didn't just close in, it charged. 2,000 pounds of muscle and bone, multiplied by 200, all focused on the center of the field. Run, Dad yelled, grabbing my hand. We dived for the only shelter nearby, the heavy reinforced steel cattle squeeze Pop had built for vaccinations. We scrambled inside and slammed the gate just as the first wave of Angus hit the men in suits. It wasn't a fight, it was a stampede. I heard screams, the sound of car doors being crushed, and the terrifying thunder of hooves. But through the small gap in the steel bars, I saw something else. Vance had dropped the ledger. It was lying in the mud, being trampled by the herd, and the thumb drive, the real thumb drive, was lying right next to it. But then I saw Vance. He managed to scramble onto the roof of one of his SUVs, which was currently being rocked back and forth by a dozen angry bulls. He was reaching down, trying to grab the ledger. Dad, he's going to get it, I yelled, but Dad wasn't looking at Vance. He was looking at the salt lick stump. Let him have it, Dad said, breathing hard. Pop always said that the greatest trap isn't the one that locks you in. It's the one that gives you exactly what you thought you wanted. Vance didn't just grab the ledger, he practically dove into the muck for it. I watched from the safety of the cattle squeeze as he clutched that mud-caked book to his chest like it was a newborn child. He scrambled back into the battered SUV, the metal of the door groaning where a ball had dented it, and the driver slammed it into reverse. They tore out of the north pasture, mud flying from the tires, leaving a trail of broken fences and half-conscious mercenaries in their wake. I was shaking, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Dad, they have it. They have the drive, the ledger, the key. Everything. How is that a trap? You said we were saving the farm. Dad didn't answer immediately. He waited until the taillights of the SUVs vanished over the ridge. Then he blew the silver whistle again, 2 short, low pulses. The cattle, which had been a roiling sea of black muscle only moments before, suddenly began to disperse. They didn't run, they simply turned and started grazing again, as if the last 5 minutes had never happened. It was the most chilling thing I'd ever seen. Pop spent 30 years working for those people, honey, Dad said, finally stepping out of the steel enclosure. He looked tired, but there was a strange, grim satisfaction in his eyes. He designed their logistics, their encryption, their entire proprietary world. And for 30 years, he watched them cut corners, bribe officials, and crush anyone who got in their way. He knew they'd come for his data the second his heart stopped. He'd been preparing for tonight since 1998. But you gave them the drive, I protested. The real one. I gave them the drive that was labeled real, Dad corrected. And it is real in a sense. It contains exactly what Vance thinks it does, the master algorithms for their global shipping network. But Pop added a little engineering flourish to the code. He called it a logic bomb with a conscience trigger. A what? Pop knew that Vance's firm would try to upload that data to their main servers immediately to regain control of their assets, Dad explained as we started walking back toward the farmhouse. The moment that drive is plugged into a corporate network, it's programmed to do a system integrity audit. If it detects that the network it's on has been used to facilitate the kind of shell company fraud Pop documented in that ledger, well, the drive doesn't just unlock the data. It acts as a digital beacon for the SEC, the FBI, and the Department of Justice. It begins a high-speed, encrypted upload of every illegal transaction, every bribe, and every safety violation Vance's firm has committed in the last decade. By tomorrow morning, Mr. Vance won't be looking for a silent partner. He'll be looking for a very good defense attorney. I stopped in my tracks. So the drive is a Trojan horse. Exactly, Dad said. And the ledger, the one he was so desperate to save. Every third page is treated with a specific chemical, a legacy of Pop's days in the chemical manufacturing business. To the naked eye, it's just old ink, but within 12 hours of contact with oxygen and skin oils, the ink begins to transfer onto the hands of whoever handled it. It's a permanent, fluorescent dye that only shows up under UV light. It's literally the mark of greed. If Vance tries to hide that book or burn it, he'll be covered in the evidence of his own theft. We reached the farmhouse. The front door was wide open, the hallway still littered with the debris from Linda and Steve's frantic search. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Aunt Linda. It was just a string of panicked emojis followed by, "The police are here. Say the drive is reporting a stolen identity." David, what did you do? Dad glanced at the screen and chuckled. Looks like Linda tried to brute force her decoy drive already. Pop really didn't miss a beat. But Dad, I said, looking around the empty, quiet house, if the Swiss account is on the drive Vance took and that drive is a logic bomb, then what about the farm? We still have the taxes to pay. We still have the debt Pop left behind. Was the inheritance just revenge? Dad walked over to the old mahogany desk in the study. He sat down and opened the bottom drawer, the one Linda had already searched and tossed aside. He reached for the back of the drawer, found a small hidden catch, and pulled the entire drawer out of the desk. Taped to the underside of the desk frame was a single, dusty envelope. It wasn't fancy. It didn't have a riddle on it. It just said, "For the one who knows how to listen to the land." Inside was a simple piece of paper. It wasn't a bank account number. It was a deed. Pop didn't keep his money in Switzerland, Dad whispered, his voice thick with emotion. That was the biggest riddle of all. He knew people like Vance and Linda think wealth has to be digital, hidden in offshore accounts and complex trusts. But Pop was a man of the earth. He used the money from his partners to buy up the mineral rights to the 3 neighboring counties back in the 80s under a dozen different names. Names that only appear in the true family records. He handed me the deed. This isn't just the farm, honey. This is the oil and gas rights for 20,000 acres. It's worth more than any Swiss trust, and because it's tied to the land itself, it can't be hacked, it can't be liquidated by a board of directors, and it can't be stolen by someone with a shovel and a flashlight. I looked at the paper, then at my dad. Why didn't you tell me? Because Pop wanted to see if we'd stand our ground, Dad said. He wanted to know if we were the kind of people who would protect the farm even if we thought there was nothing left but dirt. He knew that if he just gave us a fortune, we might end up like Linda, chasing the next big investment until we lost our souls. He wanted us to earn the peace we were about to have. The rest of the night was a blur of flashing lights and sirens. The sheriff arrived, and Dad gave a carefully edited version of the night's events. He didn't mention the cows or the whistle, he just said some trespassers had tried to rob the place and got spooked by the livestock. The mercenaries Vance had left behind were arrested. 2 of them had broken legs, and one was still trying to climb a tree that wasn't there. By sunrise, the news was already breaking. A major tech and logistics firm had suffered a catastrophic data breach. Rumors were swirling about a massive internal whistleblowing event. The stock was in freefall, but as the sun climbed over the north pasture, lighting up the fields of gold and green, it was quiet. The cattle were grazing. The old oak tree stood tall. I looked at my dad, who was standing on the porch with a cup of coffee. He looked younger than he had in years. So, I asked, what do we do now? Now, Dad smiled. Now we go fix that fence in the north pasture. And we go to the police station to bail out your Aunt Linda. I think she's learned enough of a lesson for one lifetime, don't you? I laughed. But as I turned to go inside, I noticed something on the porch railing. It was a small carved wooden bird, one of Pop's old whittling projects. I'd seen it 1,000 times, but I'd never noticed the small inscription on the bottom before. I picked it up and read, "The puzzle is never about the pieces, it's about the person who puts them together." P.S. The silver whistle works on the sheriff's dog too. Use it wisely. Pop, even from the grave, he was still the smartest engineer in the room, and that's where this story ends. The greedy got the gold they deserved, the vultures got their data, along with a one-way ticket to federal court, and the farm stayed exactly where it belonged, in the hands of the people who actually loved the dirt it was built on. Wow, talk about a long game. Pop really played everyone like a fiddle. The logic bomb is such a genius touch for an engineer. If you've ever had a family member who was a bit of a mastermind, you know that feeling, partly terrified, partly impressed. I want to thank you all for sticking around tonight. These 3 stories were a journey, from HOA tyrants to corporate meltdowns to family riddles. It's a reminder that no matter how much people try to cheat or manipulate the system, there's always someone out there who's 3 steps ahead. Before I head out, remember to like the video if you enjoyed these stories and subscribe for more. We've got a lot of wild Reddit threads to uncover in the coming weeks. Let me know in the comments which story was your favorite, the HOA war, the $1 billion bug, or the grandfather's puzzle. I'm off to get some rest, and I hope you all have a peaceful night or a productive day wherever you are. Keep building, keep coding, and whatever you do, watch out for the leap seconds.